Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mei Leaf. In this video, searching for the finest white tea. In this video, you are going to learn everything you need to know about white tea as you follow us on our journey to search for this year's white tea for the Mei Leaf collection. We're in a train station in Hangzhou. We're about to take a train to Taimushan, which is at least the spiritual home for white tea, where the mythical origin story of white tea comes from. Then we're going to head into Fujian and Zhenghe, the two authentic origins of white tea, so that you can learn everything about white tea and we can see what we can pick up this year. White tea has a bit of a confusing history, which we'll go through in a little bit, but it is a relatively new type of tea and has not been popular in China until recently. In 2013, a marketing slogan started to do the rounds, and that is, for white tea, 1 year tea is tea, 3 year tea is medicine, and 7 year tea is treasure. In other words, highlighting the fact that white tea could be aged. Since then, the market has grown enormously. White tea has become super popular and the prices have skyrocketed, which means year in, year out, it has become harder and harder to find good quality tea at decent prices. So I thought I would bring you tea heads along with us on our yearly pilgrimage to Fujian to find the best white tea possible. We're going to cut through all the marketing hype and find pinnacle teas at hopefully relatively sane prices. Let's head over to Fujian. Welcome to a rainy and atmospheric Fujian. Obviously, with this kind of weather, we're not going to head up to the tea fields just yet. So I thought that I would go through with you the traditional processing technique for making white tea. It's going to be interesting to see how closely the producers that we visit follow this traditional technique, or whether or not they've modernized in any way. I always call white tea the Goldilocks of tea. I say that because the process for making white tea is super simple. Essentially, it's a controlled drying process. But because it's so simple, there is nowhere to hide. And so if there are any issues, you will notice it in the cup. So you've got to get it just right. As soon as those fresh leaves are picked from the mountains, they will begin to wither. Cell walls will start to break down, chemical compounds will combine together and combine with the air, and the flavor will start to change. The leaves will start to oxidize, they will become sweeter, they will become nuttier, they will become smoother, and they will lose some of those grassy, greener notes. Now, the skill of white tea production is to allow some level of this oxidation, some level of this flavor maturation, but stop it at the right point, not by applying heat, but by drying out the leaf. And because they haven't applied heat, the enzymes in the leaf still remain active in a very, very slow speed, and that means that the tea is suitable for aging. So the processing technique for white tea is essentially a controlled drying process. The producers are going to be playing with two variables, temperature and moisture. The higher the temperature, the faster the enzymatic action, and therefore the more oxidation is going to take place. But of course, as you increase temperature, the leaves are also going to dry out quicker, and therefore you're going to shorten the time for oxidation, and that means less oxidation. So there's a sweet spot for temperature. Similarly, with moisture, the higher the moisture, the longer it's going to take for the leaves to dry out, and therefore potentially the longer the flavor maturation and more oxidation. If you go too dry, you're going to stop the oxidation too quickly because the leaves are going to dry out too quickly, and it's going to be too short for flavor maturation. And so you've got sort of two axes of variables that you're playing with. If you make the leaves too cool and too wet, then the water's going to stay in the leaf for too long and you're going to get a sour vegetal taste. If it's too hot and is very, very dry, then the leaves are going to dry out too quickly and it's going to, again, not have enough flavor maturation. And there is this perfect Goldilocks sweet spot of moisture and temperature where the leaves are going to oxidize enough but are going to dry out at exactly the right point for the perfect flavor profile. After this drying phase, the leaves are usually baked. Now, traditionally, they are baked over charcoal at low temperature, say 40, 50 degrees, something like that. So low temperature over charcoal to bake dry, but also add extra flavor and change the profile from a very cooling fresh tea to a little bit more warmth and a little bit more of that heating energy. Now, I have heard that this charcoal baking doesn't take place in this area anymore, or at least it's extremely, extremely rare. I'm hoping that we are going to find some producers that still do some charcoal roasting, but I don't have high hopes for that. The other factor that the tea producers need to work with is the sunlight, because as we know, sunlight with that full spectrum UV adds particular flavor profiles and volatile aromatics to the tea as it is withering and drying. And so the processing of white tea is all about finding that sweet spot, working with the elements, working with the temperature of the day, the sunlight, the moisture in the air, working with airflow, working with how high you pile the leaves, how long you leave them, all of these things. There's so many factors that come into play, and it is a very, very skilled process despite its simplicity. So I'm hoping as we head up into the mountains, we're going to see some of that traditional craft intact. Let's hope for a break in the weather, and then we're heading straight up into the mountains. Welcome to Zhenghe in Fuding in China, the original birthplace of white tea over 200 years ago. Let's go through the history of white tea, and let's first dispel some erroneous myths that are being spread around all over the internet. White tea coming down the mountain, people passing by. So, one of the common stories regarding white tea is that originally it is a Song Dynasty tea over 1,000 years ago. This story comes from the fact that Emperor Huizong wrote in his treatise on tea, the Da Guan Cha Lun book, he wrote that his favorite type of tea was a white tea, but what he was referring to was tea plants that sprouted with very pale buds and leaves, and he called that a white tea that was actually made into a green tea. That is not white tea. White tea as we know it today is all about the processing style. Okay, another myth is the origin story. Every tea has an origin story. The origin story for white tea is that around the end of the 13th century, a woman made tea from a divine tea tree in Taimu Mountains, and she used that tea to cure deadly measles. This again is an origin myth. It's not true. It doesn't stop tourists flocking to Taimu every single season and take pictures next to supposedly this famous divine mother tree, which according to most estimates is not much more than a couple of hundred years old. So again, another origin myth. What we do know is that around 200 years ago, late 1700s, in this area of Zhenghe, they started to produce white tea using a production method that now is still being used today. And supposedly the tea leaves that they used were from bushes that were transported from Taimu Mountain. There is documentation of around 1857. Some merchants did bring some tea trees from Taimu Mountain to this area, but we think that the production method is actually earlier, around 1770s, 1780s. So white tea production started in this area and then spread around Fuding and Zhenghe. So Fuding and Zhenghe are the two famed areas, the two original areas for white tea production. Interestingly, white tea production was not popular in the domestic market in China at all. In fact, the majority of white tea being produced was shipped abroad. It was for international export, with lots of very fancy stories of white tea being solely for the emperor and picked by virgins. Great marketing hype, and over 90% of the white tea produced was sold abroad. That all changed around 10 years ago when people started to realize the health benefits of white tea, and that was being very heavily promoted. And then in 2013, the aging potential of white tea started to be marketed, and people started to realize that if you aged white tea, you could make really, really incredible brews. And since then, with the burgeoning economic climate in China, the domestic tea sales for white tea have blown up and the prices have followed suit. It has skyrocketed. White tea production, white tea prices, and domestic consumption of white tea has gone crazy. So much so that white tea is now being produced all over the area. Black tea production has dropped. Fujian has become a real hub for white tea production, and other provinces in China are also producing really excellent white tea. We actually haven't bought any fresh white tea from Fuding for Mei Leaf for a few years because of the incredible price increase and the fact that white tea is being produced in other areas. But I thought we would come here to see how this massive hype in white tea has affected tea production at its source. It is prime time picking season here in Fuding. You can see behind me these pickers looking like they're wading through a sea of green. You've got that dark green, and everywhere you look around here, you've got the frosting of this lovely light jade green on top, which means the bushes are ready for picking. The season for picking is springtime, ideally. Early spring is great. They do also pick winter harvest here, so autumn to winter time, but we always go for spring pickings if possible. Interesting with white tea, the name of the white tea relates to the picking convention. White tea is the only tea which does that. All other teas will name according to the variety and the area that it's grown. So with white tea, as you probably know, you have 4 different grades of picking. The first is Yinzhen, which is just the buds. So just a bud will be Yinzhen. Then you have Mudan. Mudan is a bud and a few leaves. Now, the traditional way of sorting out the Yinzhen from the Mudan is to pick when the buds have opened and have created these 2 other leaves, and then afterwards the producer can choose whether or not to pick off the Yinzhen and make the Yinzhen tea, or whether or not to leave it if the bud is thin for Mudan. That is considered to be the more authentic way of picking, but nowadays everyone is looking for those really fat buds for white tea. So usually what happens is the first picking of the year they'll pick the big fat buds, then they will allow the tea to flush again, and probably 2 weeks later, or say 10 days to 2 weeks later, they will then go and pick the Mudan, so they'll have the bud and a couple of leaves. That is how they are doing things here. These are different styles of picking, so either picking it all, then sorting out the Yinzhen afterwards, or picking the Yinzhen first and making the Mudan always a second picking tea. After that, you have Gongmei, also known as tribute eyebrow. This is similar to Mudan, but it's thinner buds and leaves, and it's often picked in autumn. So it's the second season of picking in the year, in autumn time, when the buds are going to be skinnier. I have to say, most of the time you don't see Gongmei on the market. Instead, most sellers upsell that to Mudan instead. So they call it Mudan, even though technically it could be considered a Gongmei. Finally, you have Shoumei. Shoumei is no buds, just leaves, and is usually picked at the end of spring, so the last harvest of the springtime. In terms of varieties or cultivars, the original variety that came all the way down from Taimu Mountain, supposedly, is the Xiao variety, so a small leaf variety. But in the 1960s, the municipal area here developed the Da Bai variety, the big white variety, which is a big leaf variety tea tree. And it was planted everywhere in the 60s, but about 10 years later, they created a version of that called the Da Hao variety, which improved yield, improved consistency, and was also more resistant to drought. And so the majority of the tea produced in this area is from the Da Hao variety. This is the Da Hao variety here. Really lovely, thick, plump buds. I have to say, it is a very good looking variety. We're lucky to be in a plantation though that has other varieties, so let's go take a look. This bush here is the Da Bai variety. Looks very, very similar. It's still the big leaf variety. You can see here these large leaves. Oops, pick some tea here. And they look very nice, very beautiful buds. I'll show you a comparison. We'll try and get a close up. Bear in mind, I've just picked a random bud here, so it may not be a fair comparison, but you do get the feel just by looking at these varieties that the Da Bai variety has slightly thinner buds than the very fat Da Hao variety. Over here, this little baby here is called Tu Cha, and this is the small leaf variety. So if I take one of the bottom leaves here and compare it, again, just a random leaf, but you can definitely, when you see these two plants next to each other, this one here just has smaller looking large leaves compared to the big leaf variety. And again, I'm going to pick a random bud. Let me see if I can find the fattest bud possible here. And again, you can see that there's a fairly substantial size difference, and just the texture of the buds look different. We'll get a close-up of this. So in this Huanggang micro lot, they have these three varieties, the Da Bai, the Da Hao, and the Tu Cha small leaf variety. This will produce much less tea, and it will only be used to make Yinzhen and Mudan. It's not going to be used for Gongmei or Shoumei. Much lower yield and about 30% more expensive. It's worth noting that there are other varieties of tea plants used to make white tea. A lot of them are descendants from the Da Bai variety. One that's commonly on the market now is known as FUJIAN number 6, which is very high yield, really even budding, so it's very, very easy to produce. It's very common in this area. In my opinion, the flavor is very much lacking, so I would stay away from that variety. And finally, we are very privileged to have access to some Gushu tea fields for white tea. I'm surrounded by these beautiful tall plants. These are the original plants that supposedly came down from Taimu Mountains over 200 years ago, 250 years ago, there or thereabouts. I'm being told by the owner of this field that these tea plants are around 300 years old. So the dates kind of match up, 250 to 300 year old tea trees. They don't look very tall because this is the Xiao variety, so they're not going to grow as quickly as the Gushus growing in Yunnan forest, but this is pretty tall for this type of tea variety. This is the wild stuff. You can see over there the cultivated varieties producing top end white tea. That is the Huanggang micro lot in Panxi, revered throughout the world for producing the pinnacle of white teas. But there's always one step higher in the tea world, and here it is, the Gushu of white tea. As I said, they leave it unmanaged. It's very much a wild ecosystem here. The price of this tea is going to be astronomical. In fact, a lot of it will be gifted to government officials, but I've been told that the wholesale price for this tea is around $9,000 per kilogram, so $900 per 100 grams. That's the wholesale price. That's the price before retail, bear in mind. So I doubt we're ever going to get to try it. I'll see if I can push my luck, of course, and see if I can make it happen. But just being here, surrounded by these original tea plants, is something special. We're at one of the producers at Huanggang in Panxi, one of the most famed areas for making white tea in the entire world. And I want to go through the production method with you. You can see that production is in full flow, but these mats are empty. Usually the leaves are laid out very carefully on these bamboo mats here, and then they're brought out into this courtyard under the sun in a controlled way, moving the different levels, controlling it under the sun to get the right level of oxidation, the right speed of oxidation, and drying speed. So as you can see, empty, nothing happening here. So what's happening mostly in Fuding is they're adopting a modernized approach. The modernized approach means higher yield because it means that you get less problems, less wastage, you're less reliant on the weather. So everything that you pick is guaranteed to make it as final tea. Also, they are saying, the producers, that they think it produces higher quality tea. Not quite sure about that, but we'll talk about that later. Let me show you the standard method that's being used in Fuding area. And that is these beds which are laid out and air is pumped through them at a particular rate, at a particular temperature and humidity. So let's go through here. I'll try to speak into my mic here. Okay, so behind me you can see the leaves are laid out on these troughs. We've seen these troughs before. They have air blowing through them at a specific temperature, usually starting at around 25 degrees and ramping up slowly over 40 hours to around 50 degrees Celsius. So it's a slow, computerized, controlled way of rising the temperature from 25 to 50 over 40 hours. The smell, incredible fresh cut green apples and orchids. The material looks stunning. This is the beautiful thing about this area. The tea material looks amazing. They don't shake it, they don't move it, they just leave it for 40 hours, okay? After that point, it'll be 90% dry, and then they will bring it for baking, which is another 20 hours at a low temperature between 30 and 50 degrees. So again, maintaining that freshness in taste. This producer here is very, very proud. Modern China. He's boasting that he's got the most modern facilities possible. Come and check this out. So he calls that the semi-automated. He calls sun drying traditional, he doesn't do it anymore. Then you've got the semi-automated, and then you have in here the fully automated. So fresh leaves go in here. This roller spins and loosens up and splits up all the leaves, come through here, and then computer controlled, it goes through this conveyor belt system, again over 40 hours, raising at different levels along this conveyor belt from 25 to 50 degrees until it comes out at the bottom here. As finished dry Yinzhen silver needle. So this is 90% dry. It will then go on for final baking just to make sure it's fully dry. Can't really smell much on that. So they're loading up the bags and they can go through a lot of tea here. So you can see completely standardized. Let's quickly go outside so you can hear me better. So from something that used to take a lot of skill and a lot of reacting to the weather, reacting to the wind, to the temperature, to the sun, all of that has been taken away, and now it's fully automated. Everything is essentially a drying process. Now, does the sun make a difference? From all the studies that I've seen regarding oolong teas, regarding sun withering in other provinces of China and the world, sun drying and sun withering makes a big difference to flavor. And I am concerned that the desire to modernize, the desire to standardize, the desire to have a very good process that maximizes yield and maximizes consistency is going to sacrifice flavor potentially. And we need to find out more, and we need to taste more. Hopefully we're going to find some sun withered tea here so we can taste the difference and we can see whether or not these producers are right. They're saying that the sun drying doesn't make any difference in flavor. In fact, they're saying to me that it actually takes away some fragrance. Let's see. After spending a couple of days in Fuding, we found that all of the producers that we visited were using a similar modern style, and they were not sun withering their tea. The tea itself was tasty, but it lacked that special, unique character that we were looking for. So we decided to head inland to Zhenghe to see what we could find. Our first taste of Zhenghe white tea on this trip, and you can see here two grades. This is their Yinzhen, and this here is their Mudan, which looks crazy for a Mudan. That looks more like a silver needle than a Mudan to me, but very, very high grade. And what I'm noticing immediately here is the amount of green in these buds. Much more green. These are from the Dabai variety, but the Zhenghe Dabai, it's worth noting that Zhenghe Dabai is different from Fuding Dabai, so it is a slightly different variety, and the Fuding Dabai has more hair, is more, I would say, pretty looking in terms of its hairiness, although this does look gorgeous. But also noticing how much more green this is. So it's going to be interesting to go through his processing and see what his processing is like compared to Fuding. Let's taste. So this is the Yinzhen. Definitely more green. Definitely more fresh, more green. Slight, the nuttiness is there, but it's like very, very green nuts, and still got a bit of that cut grass aroma to it. So it's very fresh, very bright. So it's a matter of personal preference if you prefer having it more of a bright, fresh, sort of almost slightly green tea taste to it, or if you're looking for something warmer. We are now tasting this producer's Zhenghe. You can see it here. This is an award-winning Zhenghe, won an award last year, and the picking protocol on it is amazing. I mean, it looks incredible, but again, very green, especially considering this is last year's tea, surprisingly green. Now, the producer is saying to me that he recommends that you always wait a year after your silver needle or any white tea, let the green calm down so that it produces a warmer flavor. I have to say, just by drinking a few cups of that Yinzhen, I'm starting to feel that very cooling sensation, and I know if I drank too much of it, it might be a bit uncomfortable. Let's taste this Zhenghe, sold at about $35 per 100 grams in these cases. Very, very nice case. Award-winning Zhenghe from 2018. Definitely stronger, definitely sweeter, but still very, very bright, very, very verdant, very, very green. And you can see the wet leaves here of both the silver needle and the Zhenghe. Beautiful pickings, really, really beautiful pickings. However, in my opinion, for my taste, way too green for us. Let's go and take a look at the facilities and see how they make this tea. It's interesting how white tea is such a simple process, and yet every single facility seems to handle it in a different way. Let's go through here. You're going to see some sun drying, but we're going to focus on that later. Normally, well, I say normally, but a lot of the time, the traditional knowledge is that the leaves, when they come in fresh, are sun withered. Not in this case. In this case, the leaves come in. You can see them coming in here, being sorted beautifully. Take a look at some leaves here. Much fatter pickings. More stem, I would say. Smell. Very green, but more sort of limey, a little bit more zingy. So even now the smell of the leaves smells a little bit more fresh. Beautiful. Wow, can't take my eyes off that. Look at that. That picking is crazy. This must be yin-zhen picking. Okay, they're making black tea as well behind. If you heard that little sound, that's the rolling machine. Right, this way. I'm gonna get lost in here. So after picking, the leaves go to withering. Withering happens in here. So now the big difference here is single layer. They're going to be processing on single layer for 32 hours at 30 degrees, so different temperatures, different times. Because of the fact that it's single layer, they can do it faster. So instead of 40 hours or 60 hours in the previous facilities, they are instead withering for a shorter period of time, and they can afford to do that because they're not piling the leaves to 1.5 inches, 2 inches. They're doing it a single layer on these beds, and they think that that makes the better tea. However, perhaps that thicker layer produces more of the oxidation, gives more of the heat for enzymatic activity, and helps the wither time to be longer, to produce more oxidation, and therefore you get less of a green tasting tea. Just my thoughts, I might be wrong, but that's potentially what's happening here. After 32 hours here, they then like to bring it out under the sun for final finishing. 5 to 6 hours under the sun. Let's go out and we can go and check out those leaves. So 5 to 6 hours under the sun. They're saying that the UV light helps to dry it out, but also kill off microbes in the leaves, which again isn't technically, I think, true. If you think about how sun drying is used in pu'er tea to maintain microbe activity. There's a lot of misinformation here. I don't know exactly which is right and which is wrong, but I'm just giving you my opinions from visits to other provinces in tea country. Beautiful sight here. The leaves sun drying. I love to see leaves out under the sun. I think this adds flavor. I would love to know the difference between this sun effect on fresh leaves withering under the sun, which is again the sort of authentic traditional knowledge of how white tea is made, rather than once it is pretty much dry. Smells, you're getting that sun smell, hard to describe, a little bit more savory note coming through. Smells really nice. If there's no sun, then it will go into an oven. They'll bake it at 80 degrees for 2 to 3 hours. Otherwise, they'll put it under the sun for 5 to 6 hours and then put it in the oven for a final hour at 80 degrees just to make sure it's finished. They do not charcoal bake in this facility, although they said if you specifically require it, they can do it. So it has to be, interestingly, it has to be according to the clients and customers' request, but they don't do it as standard. And that is key here, is consumer demand. If the consumer demands it, then sure, they will do it and they will take that extra time and you will have to pay that extra cost. But as a standard, most consumers don't demand it because most consumers don't really talk about it or know about it. And so they will sell it like this. Up in a bijou micro lot here in Zhenghe, 1,000 meters plus, lovely, lovely location. We have here some xiaocai, so the small leaf variety original, and the large leaf, the dabai, next to each other. So this gives you a visual comparison of the two. Much, much smaller buds. I've got a large dabai bud here and a small bud from the xiaocai that you can take a look at. What I like to see here is the insect bites. Take a look at this, all insect bitten here. And that obviously means no pesticides being used here. So it's always nice to see that. Another giveaway is a lot of moss around. So they don't use pesticides. They manage the weeds manually. And that's all great to see. You can take a little look at the trunks here. Nice, beautiful, beautifully managed. Single trunks are about 30-35 years old, I'm being told. They pick twice a year, springtime and autumn, and then they don't cut these trees back. They leave them for the dormant period. Essentially, this is organic farming. They're not going to apply for the certificates. I spoke to the owner and he said there's no need for them to do that, obviously, because they sell out all their tea anyway. And with these high grade teas, there's so much demand. As long as they produce it in the right way, they don't need that certification. Again, we've said it before, we'll say it 100 times. The teas that are organically certified have more of a tendency to be the low grade, low altitude teas that the producers are trying to maximize the amount of yield in terms of money they can get for their crop, and they know that on the international market, them certifying it as organic raises the price of lower quality teas. That's not necessary here. Beautiful location here. They're picking Mudan at the moment. The picking here is prime time. You can see some of the pickings here, but let's head over to this young gentleman here. Ni hao. He might be a bit grumpy. Let's see. Ni hao. 我可以看吗? 我可以看吗? He's very shy. 我可以看吗? 谢谢你. Let's take a little look here at this young gentleman's picking. Ooh, very nice. So we've got some Yinzhen being picked here, but mostly it's Mudan, so a bud and one leaf. Very fine picking. Congratulations, sir. You're throwing a bit of Yinzhen in there, but you know, hey, raises the quality of their Mudan. Stunning pickings up here in Zhenghe. Beautiful micro lot, high altitude tea, picked by low altitude people. Tasting, tasting, tasting. We're now in a tea shop, but these people have their own tea plantations, so we're tasting their tea. Sometimes easier to go to the shop and then taste the teas there, so you can see what's happening rather than just tasting what's fresh off the field. It may be too green. Beautiful shop, beautiful surroundings. I have to say that packaging and branding is on point, as seems to be the case all over Zhenghe and Fuding. Branding, 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 and prices to match. This facility that we've seen pictures, they do have sun withering over bamboo sieves. So exactly the traditional style, the Quentong style. They lay it out on thin beds. They put them in these sieves. They layer them up under the sun with some shade, so they control the directness of the sunshine, and they will move the layers over time to get some sunlight. This producer here is convinced that the sun makes a big difference to the taste. So we're tasting their top grade by Mudan, and it's interesting because what they consider top grade seems to be much more about appearance rather than taste, I would say, because it's all about how close it is to a yin gen. In other words, how few leaves there are and how much of it is bud material. So I find that interesting because I actually like the taste of leaves, and so oftentimes what is considered top grade mudan may not necessarily be my version of what top grade mudan is, because I'm buying according to taste. And for me, having that leaf material, those young leaves to medium leaves that oxidize in a different way, give a certain character to the tea. And it's an example of how, in my opinion, white tea is a little bit, there's a bit too much emphasis on appearance, a bit too much emphasis on fineness, a bit too much emphasis on, you know, the presentation rather than the flavor. For me, a yin gen tastes like a yin gen, a mudan should taste like a mudan. We've tasted their second grade mudan, which still looks incredible, but has more leaves, and I actually prefer it. The flavor on this is very much like a yin gen. A little bit stronger. There's a nice sweetness. What I'm noticing with all of their teas is that there's just a general sweetness. Now, whether or not that is because of the fact that it's been properly Chuan style withered under the sun, I can't say for sure, but certainly I notice it. Intense sweetness in the mouth. The flavor at the start, though, is not mudan flavor.
We're back in our hotel in Zhenghe. It's been a good few days of tasting a lot of white teas in Fujian in Zhenghe. Celine is here with me.
Hey.
From around the camera to in front of the camera. So we just want to give you some impressions right now, and there are going to be some generalizations, of course, but our impressions of the differences between Fujian and Zhenghe white tea. Do you want to start? What are your thoughts of Fujian tea in general as an overall?
In general, Fujian white tea has more of a nuttier but lighter taste to it. Zhenghe, very nice, but like more on the grassier notes.
I think, yeah, I would agree with that. I think Fujian, their oxidation time feels like it's longer, and therefore it's developing a little bit more of the sort of smoother, nuttier notes in the tea, but they are very, very light, like super light. The color of the liquor is almost water.
It's like transparent.
Yeah, it's very, 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 very pale, and this is what they seem to be pushing as a sort of selling point. Look how light it is, how incredibly light the liquor is. Whereas Zhenghe, they do tend to use a little bit more of the traditional techniques, and the color of the liquor is darker. The flavor is a bit stronger, but it is a little bit more green, or a lot more green, at least in the tastings that we've done. So Zhenghe, greener but sweeter after finish, and Fujian, nuttier, smoother, but very, very light. We have here, fresh from the fields, some Guangxi silver needles. So this is a completely different province. So we're always receiving samples while we're on our travels as well. It's not just tasting at the producers that we're at, so we're always selecting when we're on the road as well. So this is a Guangxi silver needle, just to show you that silver needle, oh, the smell already. Silver needle is being produced in many other provinces. With the rise in popularity of white tea, many different provinces, for example Guangxi, for example Yunnan, are producing white tea. You may have heard of Moonlight White, Yue Guangbai, which has become very, very popular. Jinggu, the smell. and so many other provinces are making white tea, and we wanted to just highlight that there are the differences, especially now while Fujian and Zhenghe is fresh in our memory. The smell of those wet leaves,
very different.
Very, very different. You're getting a lot more sort of the sunshine smell. And what I mean, it has a little bit more of a tropical note to it, a bit more of a warm meadow note to it. Sweeter. I'm getting honeys and papayas and Really, really lovely, really, really delicious. I've spoken to the producer of this tea, and he says that it is sun withered. Because white tea is such a simple process, there's going to be much more reliance on those little things like variety and like whether or not it is sun withered. And the smell is definitely a lot stronger, wouldn't you say?
It's definitely more fruity, like you get more cooked fruit kind of smell to it. I love that, I really do. I like my fruits.
Yeah, so while Fuding and Zhenghe tea, especially Fuding tea, is very, very revered for its lightness, delicacy and elegance, I think teas being made in other provinces that are a bit warmer are just bringing out more of that sort of that strength and a little bit more funk and a bit more complexity, a bit more complexity to the flavor. And that's not necessarily, one is not necessarily better than the other. If you like your white teas to be very pure tasting and delicate, then maybe this isn't the type of tea for you.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of people that like very light white teas. So, what your preference is.
Different strokes for different folks. Okay, have a taste. This is our first taste of Guangxi Silver Needle 2019. Cheers.
Cheers.
Chin chin.
Chin chin.
Got a little herbal note going on. Like
I was going to say creamy, but yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely cream. There's sort of overripe papaya, mashed banana note.
I was going to say
on.
mashed pears.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Those sort of lighter fruits. Sweet, very, very sweet tea. But there is a little herbal note going through. Let me try and nail it. I think it's the taste that you get from white chrysanthemum. You know those,
that's good.
Not yellow chrysanthemum.
No.
The white chrysanthemum. A little bit more sweet floral herbal note coming through. Doesn't have the nuttiness of a Fuding.
No.
Doesn't have that marzipan nuttiness of a Fuding.
It's thicker, definitely.
But it has, it feels thicker and it has this sweetness and this fruitiness and this sunnier personality to it.
It's got a tan.
And I'm not sure if this is just me sort of making stuff up in my head, but knowing that this is sun withered and seeing in Zhenghe and in Fuding, well, to be fair, the last person we met in Zhenghe, she did sun wither and her tea definitely tasted sweeter.
That's true.
Than the other teas that we tasted that never saw the sun, that was only processed indoors. So, again, we're making assumptions here, but it seems that the sun brings out a little bit more sweetness and maybe fruitier, volatile aromatics in the tea. So there you go, the differences between Fuding and Zhenghe. This will be our last tasting of today. We've tasted a lot of white tea in these areas. Good teas.
But nothing really stood out, when you get like a taste that makes you go, aha, yes, I need this in my life. It wasn't, it was like, oh, this is nice. But
nothing that different. And, we've got producers already, we've got suppliers. So what we're trying to look for always is something that little bit extra special. Something that if you walked away from it, you'd be regretting not having it in your stash.
Thinking about it.
Yeah, you'd have it circling in your head like, oh, we should have got that tea. I wish I could taste that tea. So far, we've tasted lots of good teas, good white teas, good standards, good quality, but nothing that we're going to regret too much not taking back in our suitcase.
Especially with the price tag.
Yeah.
It really...
Crazy prices. Anyway, we'll reflect further and we'll see what tomorrow brings. We're going to leave you here in Zhenghe and return next week for our concluding episode in this white tea trip sourcing video. Did we find some pinnacle teas in Zhenghe and Fuding? I'm not going to give anything away, but if you're watching at the time of release, then you might want to head over to meileaf.com where we have released our entire collection of white tea 2019 for you to check out, including some limited batch teas. I hope that you join us next week for the concluding episode. Until then, it's goodbye from Zhenghe. That's it, tea heads. Check out our other videos, taste our teas wherever you are in the world by browsing meileaf.com or come and visit our tea house in London. Other than that, I'm Don from Mei Leaf. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags. Keep drinking the good stuff and spread the word because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.